past couple of years, you may have heard some terms being thrown around if you've lived in the United States of America. Terms like socialism, communism are not terms that many of us are used to. Now, if you went to a very progressive university, you've been indoctrinated into it without even knowing it, or maybe you knew exactly what it was and you understand it clearly. But for those who haven't heard about it, or understand it, or know why some people are nervous about it, then this show is going to help you understand. We will be speaking with my guest today, Dr. Bernard Mauser. He is a specialist in socialism, public policy, economics. He has a lot to offer us, especially in this time when so many people are questioning, why are so many people so nervous about this? And why are others complacent? It's probably because of ignorance, to tell you the truth. That's why I say you have to educate yourself. You have to be alert because times are changing very quickly. And as a Christian, is socialism compatible? Is communism compatible? What do their doctrines say? How does it compare to what God would say? The Judeo-Christian God, that is. I'm Catherine Camp, and this is Faith and Culture. Let's get started. To today's program, we're going to be talking to Dr. Bernard Mauser. He is a faculty member at Southern Evangelical Seminary, my alma mater, and he's the director of the Philosophy, Political, and Economic program at SES, where you can get a certificate going through the program, but I'll let him tell you more about that. Welcome, Dr. Mauser. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm glad to be here with you because we have a very important topic we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about socialism, Christianity, and perhaps we'll touch on a little bit of communism. And how do these fit together, or do they? So, Dr. Mauser is a specialist in this area, so this is a real treat to have him here today. So let's start out, Dr. Mauser, explaining with the audience, what is socialism?
Socialism is often contrasted with capitalism. And so when you hear this in the political realm, you'll hear one side use capitalism like it's a dirty word, and you hear the other side use socialism as like a dirty word, and neither one of them ever defines what they mean by that. The best way to understand socialism, if you looked at the minimalistic definition that everyone who advocates socialism, it's this, that socialism says that society should own all the businesses. And when they say society, what they mean by that is the government. So when they say society, they don't, even though it's a vague notion in a lot of people's mind, what they mean is government needs to own all the businesses. So they're in control of who does what is produced, and they're the masterminds, the specialists who are going to tell you how best to force society to function in this way versus a different way. Capitalism, contrary to socialism, means that individuals own the means of production or own the businesses, and that you decide best what you're going to produce, who you're going to hire, and how much you're going to produce. And so if an individual owns it, that's usually what we mean by capitalism, because they own the capital, meaning the equipment that is needed to produce everything. And socialism, it's the government owns everything and they're going to micromanage. If you ever hear a economist talk about this or debate about this, usually the main debate tends to be a Keynesian model. They talk about a top-down. We need a society run by experts or planners or czars, I think was the term that became popular under Obama. You needed somebody who is an expert that was going to manage our life best. So it's a top-down approach that the government decides best how to do this. The bottom up, that's the individuals. There's 330 million Americans. The idea that you can best plan your life better than a bureaucrat in DC or a bureaucrat in whatever your state capital is. This bottom up view is more of a capitalistic notion that individuals should be free to choose. And we can look at some of the arguments for those, but just starting out, those are the basic definitions. So if you're more in favor of you planning what's best for your life and having knowledge of the local circumstances better than somebody who's far away, that's more of a bottom up. You're more in favor of a capitalistic model. If you think you need a resident expert to plan your life for you, you tend to favor the socialistic model.
Okay. So does this go also into how you run your life, or does it just stay with the actual business ownings or owning of a business model, or does it start to infiltrate into other aspects of your life with the socialism?
Well, the socialists, it tends to be the case that socialists want to micromanage every area of your life, because it's not enough for them just to stop with owning the business, how much is produced, what is your job, and also how should you think. Okay, there's a certain set of things that you're allowed to think and other things that you're not allowed to think. And so the more control they get, you're seen as subversive if you say anything to undermine the government or whoever the public policy experts. And here's an analogy I recently heard. Fauci has been in the news for the last year, ever since coronavirus hit. And by all accounts, the people who know him, I have a student, I think, who this is maybe his uncle's best friend or something. He said, Fauci is just brilliant. And that's what everybody, by all accounts, everybody thinks Fauci is pretty brilliant when it comes to whatever his area of specialization is. Now, regardless how brilliant any human being is, we all have interests in different things in life. So we act because there's something we're interested in. We have self-interest. And that's not necessarily the same thing as greed, but we're all influenced by whatever we're interested in. But even speaking to the aspect of his brilliance, when he goes to a Yankees game or another professional sporting event, it may be the case that in this one specific area, he's the most brilliant man in the entire stadium. But if you took any three men in there, or even two men, and their knowledge of reality is going to far outreach Fauci's area of knowledge of reality, because there's more reality that two men have been able to assimilate in the course of just living their life. Now, we're not just saying in his one specialized area. So he might have studied one area for 7 years. Great. You're the expert in that one area. But as it relates to all of reality, any two men are going to be significantly wiser when it comes to all of reality than your one area. So this is an argument against the idea that bureaucrats can micromanage your life better than you can. They can't possibly have all the knowledge that is needed. So they would actually have to have you have to have a godlike view of the government. You have to attribute these divine attributes that the government must be omniscient in some way to know all that they actually need to know regarding everybody's circumstances, all the things that are happening in the world. They couldn't possibly have that type of information. And Hayek, who's a Nobel Prize winner, Friedrich Hayek won the Nobel Prize in 1974. He wrote this book, and or he wrote several books that were arguing against this rise of socialism and talked about how it was encroaching with this ever-expanding bureaucracy and government overreach. And he coined this expression that there's a pretense of knowledge that the bureaucrats have. It's almost like they assume they have a ton of knowledge they can't possibly have because they're just one individual and they can't explore, hey, how many socks do we need today at Walmart for all the people that are going to go into Walmart to buy socks? They couldn't possibly know that. Who put a hole in their sock this morning as they're blowing through their sock when they're putting it on their house in whatever city you're living in? They could not possibly know that. But Walmart still figures out to have just the right number of socks. If I want to go get socks from Walmart today, I know they're going to have my size and a sufficient number. How do they do that? Well, that is the opposite of the socialistic model. It's the beauty of capitalism, of the business owners are able to offer these products and they're able to know just how much to stock. If they stock too much, they go out of business. But somehow these individuals were able to discover for their little specific area just how much to have of each type of thing. It's one of those miracles of modern society that there's an invisible hand guiding it. It's just so crazy to think about and how beautiful it is. So the freedoms we get to enjoy in our society and these other societies that are completely controlled by bureaucrats, they're like, how do you figure out how many pantyhose to produce? And I think there's this story in the 80s of Margaret Thatcher meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. And Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of England. And as she's meeting with Gorbachev, who was basically the ruler of USSR, the old Soviet Union, he said, how do you figure this out? They bring these numbers into me. We have to produce this. She said, I don't ever figure any of that out. That's the market takes care of all that. And when she refers to the market, just realize the market is just this, it's a heuristic. It's basically this model we use. It's a phrase to summarize the collective actions of all the free people in your society collaborating together to try to find out, okay, I have this money and you have this product. Can we freely exchange? That's just what we mean by the market. So it's an abstraction of this real phenomenon of the cooperation of millions of us in our society and billions of us throughout the world, freely exchanging with each other as we have needs. And the market just takes care of all those things. We don't need a central planner doing this.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot more freedom when it comes to capitalism than when it comes to socialism.
Oh, absolutely. And so I'm in the SES, one of the unique things that we try to teach at SES is a robust natural law theory, that the moral law is rooted in human nature. And I think one of the things that we could tie this into is this one aspect of human nature that all of us have is we have a rational soul. So there's as a rational animal, so you have certain things that by your nature you share with other animals. So we need food and shelter, and we have certain material desires and things that we need to survive. But there's this immaterial aspect, the rational aspect, because you're composed of an intellect and a will. This is how you're created in God's image. That will, there's so much tied up with that goes along with this capitalistic idea of being free to operate, because for one, we don't despise virtue. It's actually one of the things that we strive for, but the only way to be virtuous is not to be controlled. You have to freely choose what you're doing to be virtuous. If I'm forcing you to do something, if I'm coercing you to do it, that's the opposite of being virtuous. You're not you're undermining somebody's free will by forcing you to do this. So you don't fault the person who you put their hand on a knife and you put your hand on their hand and you force them to slit somebody's throat. They're not morally responsible for killing that person. You force them to do that. What you recognize this intrinsic part of human nature by allowing them to be free and to choose. So it's just recognizing their virtue. So that's how it's tied into this natural law theory. And the idea goes along very well with capitalism and freedom and freely allowing people to pursue what's good cooperate with one another to make each other's life better off.
Yeah. That's how I grew up in the United States. And I guess some people do like to have someone else pick up the slack and control certain aspects of their life. But frankly, I don't think that's how we were created. God gives us free will. And, even in Proverbs, he says, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be forced to, I guess, support someone who refuses to work. And if you've ever worked in a shelter or worked around a lot of the homeless, and by no means are they all the same, just like anyone else in the world is not the same. The ones that I've met, I would say at least 50% were happy not working.
Yeah.
They were happy just living on the street. And I think it's something that they've talked themselves into, as odd as that may seem to a lot of people, and you have a hard time believing it. Go out there, do some work around on the streets with shelters and such, and ask what's going on, and you'll find out. There are people that want just to not have the responsibility of a job, and they would rather be taken care of. That, I know it sounds harsh, but I would not have believed it if I hadn't seen it. So to me, socialism looks like that. And I've heard, now correct me if I'm wrong, that in socialism, you are not even allowed to have own your own property, your own home.
That's the ultimate goal. So there's the way the media bandies about these terms is a little different than I usually portray it. So the way I like to put it is a idea of total government on one side of the spectrum and no government on the other. So total government would be what we would call communism. And so it's the logical consequences. If you are consistent socialist, you want complete control of everything. That's total government control, total coercion. That's the side of communism. No government is the side of anarchy. And most of the civilized nations of the world fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And so at least where there's prosperity, you're going to find it much closer to the anarchy side with less government control. And part of the reason is because of this idea of the pretense of knowledge that government bureaucrats are going to be super inefficient in anything they do. Even if they're like completely virtuous people, there's just too much information about reality they can't possibly know. By the time they got information to make the decision, that information would be outdated by a year. It's like, okay, oh yeah, so a year ago, we needed you to produce these socks. Oh, what do I do with that? And then in the old Soviet Union, there's accounts of entire plants being shut down for 6 months because they didn't know that they only had green color paint, and they had to paint the machines red, but they only had green paint. And so they couldn't move it out to the production line because the way the manual was written, it was only able to be run if all the machines were painted red, but they only had green. So by the time they got word up to the appropriate supervisors and got permission to paint the machine green, 6 months had passed, and the plant had been shut down for 6 months because nobody wanted to be executed, because that's one of the things with total control. Everything's enforced possibly by your death. It's not just imprisonment, but if you violate this, hey, the manual says this, I'm not dying because we got the machine painted the wrong color. It's not worth it to me to die. So I'm going to run it up the chain of command. And nobody felt like they had the authority to change the manual. So it's even with the most virtuous bureaucrats, it's not even that. It's just the nature of reality that on the ground, if you're able to be flexible as individuals and you and I could freely exchange, we could do something right now. And there's this other cool thing that we have in a capitalistic model, that socialism one of the things they advocate is eliminating prices. That's prices are knowledge surrogates. They communicate a ton of knowledge that you don't have to even know. So I don't need to know that a tsunami wiped out this major plant that produced diapers. I think a third of the diapers got wiped out. I think this was like 2013 by this tsunami that hit Japan, like, about 10 years ago or whatever it was. I just knew that the price of diapers was going up. I'm like, what the heck? You don't have to know that a tsunami wiped out. You just saw that the prices were going up. Okay, well, this explains that. And so the bureaucrats, they don't even have prices as knowledge surrogates that we would get to have under capitalism. It's just fascinating the way the world works with allowing freedom to operate. All of our lives are better off.
Yeah, and I think the model that America up to now has shown is that the whole world becomes better off when a leader like the United States up to now is a capitalistic format. Everyone else is better off. We have more money to help other countries when they're in distress. We can ship things out right away. We are very, although there's always going to be lag time. It's not going to be as much as like what you're saying in a society that is kind of paralyzed by change. If like you talked about the paint, it paralyzed everybody and it stopped production. And as far as, yes, the enforcement of, I guess, behavior or doing something wrong, if anyone thinks that's extreme, read some history on the CCP and how people are basically exterminated for thinking the way they think because it doesn't fall in line with what they want people to think. And that's going to stifle the economy when there's no freedom. I've been watching a lot of, I don't know, are you familiar with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai?
No.
He is a biological systems engineer.
Mm-hmm.
He's he has 4 PhDs from MIT, and he talks a lot about this stuff with the economy and how if people don't have access to the truth of things, of whatever it is, then we don't have the freedom to move, to make decisions. And then if we don't have that truth and freedom, we eventually do not become a very healthy society. We become unhealthy because we can't make good decisions if the truth is being hidden. And that goes into economics as well. If you don't have that free society for exchange of ideas, then you're not going to have the freedom to move, to make those quick movements that you need to make to keep things, like even in a healthy system, to produce. Anyway, he makes so much sense.
Here's another thing that I think is consonant with the Christian view, and I think of course, everything that's consonant with Christian view is just what we would say is consonant with reality. And so so specifically as Christians, that's what we're really concerned with, because if it's true, which it is, then you're going to find it's consonant with reality. So there's certain key things that the socialists believe that are against reality. And one of those views is that the government owns you in some way. And so they own you, and so they would basically be able to tell you what to do with your body, how to use it. And essentially that is what they do time and time again when they confiscate the business that you have, or they confiscate your wealth to give it to other people. One, that's not virtuous in any way. You're not being virtuous if the neighbor came over and took $20 off you and gave it to one of your other neighbors. You're not being virtuous in any way. They have a gun to you. So one, they're undermining virtue. If you wanted to help your neighbor, that's great. That's when you become virtuous, if you voluntarily give it. But two, they think that they have the right to tell you what to do with your own wealth. Historically, if somebody owns your body, we call that slavery. And that's basically the view of this idea that government owns everybody, is that you are their slave, and they're going to enslave you to take care of everybody else. So that's not only non-virtuous, but it reduces you to the point of slavery. So they see you as nothing but their slave. I had several of my students just join the military last summer, and where I live in North Carolina, there's a huge patriotic idea that, hey, if I serve my country, I love the red, white, and blue. I love America. I'm really signing up for Uncle Sam. And they told several of my students, we own you now. So you're government property. So we pay you this amount of money, and we own you. Don't get sunburned, or you're going to get fined and whatever. I said, they don't own you, but that's not exactly how it works. So them paying you a salary doesn't mean they own your body. But I understand what they're trying to communicate to you, but it's technically not that. It's not like you're all of a sudden a slave. They could do anything to your body they would want to. So if they wanted to be immoral to you in certain ways, they still wouldn't be allowed to do that. If they owned you, they would be allowed to do that. But if you're nothing but property, but you're actually creating God's image, there is a value to you, and they don't own you. So even if it were the case that God owns you, which, you're not your own, you were bought at a price.
Right.
This biblical idea, nobody wants to say that the government is God. So, yeah. Even if it were the case that God owns me, it's not the case that you own me, government, because you're not God.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of the reason Christians stand to pose such a threat to socialism and communism societies, communistic societies, is because we are free beings. We were created in the image of God.
Yeah.
And the thought of God owning us is only if you want that. If you don't want God, he is going to let you do whatever you want. It's not like he forces you to do anything.
Sure.
That is virtuous. When you do things coming from your own heart,
mm-hmm.
and desire, and a deep desire, and that comes straight from God. If you know anything about the human condition, we don't naturally care about others. And that's just something that God puts in us, because that's part of his image, is caring about humanity and the creation around us. So yeah, that is tough, especially with the military. I know they have their reasons for doing that, but I'm glad that you're telling them, hey, they don't actually own your body.
Yeah. When I try to tell them, I say, so some of them were talking about their unit here where we are in North Carolina. They said just about everybody were Trump supporters. So their commander was told, well, if you guys, they're screening them. They're saying, hey, are you guys mostly conservative? And if so, they're trying to eliminate some of these currently from the military under the Biden administration. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how about civil dialogue with people who disagree with you? It's just super weird. I will try to save your life. I don't care what you believe, because you're creating God's image.
Yeah.
Just do what's right. Oh, it's crazy.
It's bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I were young, that would really deter me from joining the military. And although I know that's not the topic here, but I think that I think there's going to be a decrease in people enlisting, because it's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
That's what the CCP does. They came out with those helmets that I saw it either last summer or last spring,
mm-hmm.
where, they have these helmets that will explode.
The suicide helmets, yeah.
Suicide helmets. Is that that would be my fear.
Yeah.
That would be my fear. Is that next? You want to know how I'm thinking?
Right.
And, just let me do something virtuous. Let me protect our country. Let me stand up for it.
Yes.
No, I didn't vote for you, but, you're one person. I want to be out there and help the millions of others and protect them.
Sure.
So yeah, it's going to backfire.
Yeah.
All I can say.
Here's another reason I think that you find such a hostility toward Christianity, especially among those who identify with these socialistic ideas, is although I think Plato's Republic lays the groundwork for a lot of this, and a lot of the political philosophers going forward are footnotes on Plato's idea. It was articulated really well in Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, where he has all these rules for implementation to try to get society. Part of the argument is we want society to be more just, which that in itself is noble. We do want that. But he has these 10 measures for implementation. If we're going to implement anything to see a completely just society, one of them is abolishing religion. And so we need to get rid of all religion. Well, Christians obviously are going to oppose that. But Marx is an atheist and he's a materialist. So only material things exist. There's no immaterial realm. There's no life after death. There is no God or angels, no spiritual realm. So of course we're going to resist that very strongly. But when you start looking at some of the other measures for his implementation, we've gone a long way toward that in our country. And one of them is like the progressive income tax, abolishing ownership of land, where you try to nationalize everything, nationalize industry. And so you'll see a lot of these policies. And one of the crucial things is abolishing the family. And the most effective way, he says, to abolish the family is get rid of homeschooling and make sure it's only public school kids, where basically their high priests, if you will, of Marxism are the public school teachers that are trying to get the kids separated from their parents. Because this is one of the ways to subvert the family, is to teach them things that the parents necessarily wouldn't like. And it's just really, these are just his rules for implementation. I've gotten pushback. Aren't you a public school teacher also? I actually am a public school teacher, but I know the philosophy. Right. And a guy gave me pushback like, well, how could you, based on what you said with what Marx says to do, how can you justify being a public school teacher? I'm the perfect guy, in my opinion, to be in the position, because I actually do think the parents have authority. I'm trying to be there in the place of the parents, teaching the kids what is virtuous, what is good, what corresponds to reality. I don't have the audacity to say that I love their kids more than they do, and I know how to guide their kids better than they do. I'm going to do the best I can with what I see their strengths are, but I'm always going to the parent like, hey, so-and-so is really struggling. Are you aware that they're struggling? What can we do together to help your child? Because I want them to do well. Yeah.
Yeah, as my children were growing up, I was one of those parents where I was very careful with who was teaching them. Mm-hmm. And that's not how I was raised, but God kind of woke me up, opened my eyes, look what's going on. And I started to realize, oh my goodness, they have them 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Almost 8 hours a day. And then if they stay for sports, even longer. Mm-hmm. They have a great deal of influence, especially when they start in kindergarten on up. So it's very important who that teacher is. I did a lot of research on this. I did some 5-6 years ago, and then again this past year, mm-hmm. I did more, and I started even digging deeper and finding that this the specter of communism has been hovering over the education of our country since the 1890s.
Wow.
So, the development of the Department of Education, all the trickle down, the ideas that come out of there are not family friendly. And I think a lot of parents woke up with a lot of this, with having to do school from home, and everything was on Zoom or online, and the parents were overhearing. what was actually being taught, which is a good thing. So some good
Yeah,
things
and
to
they
come
were
out of these.
very concerned, huh?
Yes. And I felt so justified. I was like, this is what I've been trying to tell people for years now.
Yeah.
Watch out. This is what's going on. Now, I know that what we're talking about is very extreme on the communist and the socialism side.
Sure.
But in the talk that I heard you do in 2019, you talked about there's also, if you put too much on the other side, on capitalism. Tell us what goes on there, how that can be bad if it goes too far. You were talking about crony capitalism.
Yeah. So one of the dangers, and that's what most people confuse when they talk about condemning certain things of capitalism, what they really mean is they're condemning certain features of crony capitalism. And basically what that is when the businesses or the business owners are partnered with people in positions of government authority. And so we'll just throw out a hypothetical. Suppose big tech really loved a certain candidate and they excluded any negative criticism for this candidate, and then they highlighted critical things for the candidate who was opposed to their candidate. This would be an example of crony capitalism. And if the lawmakers in power protected those businesses, I'll give you one easy example is when you look at most of the licensing laws in America, just for American history, licensing laws, the way they operate is they protect the group who's already in that position of power, and they create a barrier for market entry into that same sector. So in the 1990s, I became a licensed massage therapist by the Ohio State Medical Board. So I went to 2 years of massage therapy school, did all my coursework, had to take a state medical board exam, and I got my massage therapy license. I met several other massage therapists who, before they started licensing it, they were practicing massage therapy. They're grandfathered in. They never had to take any tests, go to any school. They learned it from their parents. So one guy who I was really close friends with, his dad was a chiropractor. And he was a chiropractor before there were chiropractic licensing laws. So he didn't have to do all the same standards of testing. And for most of, or just about every industry, that's how they operated. In the early 1900s, meat packers, there was The Jungle that was written, Upton Sinclair. And this was this call for certain standard practices in meatpacking plants because it's just so gross there, allegedly. We need federal oversight. And if we have certain federal workers coming in, making sure that there were these standards and you had to be licensed, well, the people they didn't apply to were the very people who were appealing for this. They didn't want competition in that field. There wasn't a market solution, though there could have been. So suppose you got sick, in a market solution, if you got sick from eating bad meat, you could sue the company. They could go out of business, or they pay whatever compensation. With the idea that we need to have a license, the very companies that were appealing for it were the ones who were excluded from the licensing laws. And so this was an idea of crony capitalism. And what ends up happening is the very men, the legislators who were pushing through these laws and these bills, they end up getting huge donations from these companies and these businesses to make sure that they're the unique company. They're the only ones who could have a monopoly. No, the only real way to have a monopoly in the United States is to be the federal government. The federal government is the only one who has, because in a truly free market, there's nothing that stops you from opening a business. So if I wanted to compete with my local, whatever business it is, I could just open my own business unless the government stops me from doing so. If it's a free market, if I have enough money and I've saved, I can open up a business anytime. No, it takes an average of, if you want to start a business in the United States, and you need to do all the laws, it takes an average of 3 days to open a business here. And so it's a pretty free society.
Yeah.
3 days, that's not terrible. There's a little bit of a barrier to market entry. We call those barriers to market entry, to getting started.
Yeah.
In Haiti, which is super poor, it takes 89 days to start a business.
Wow.
So if you did everything, working really hard, 8 hours a day, asking the government for all the things that are required to open a business in Haiti, it takes about 3 months to open a business there.
Wow.
And that affects your wealth, your ability to start businesses.
Yeah. And it also affects the people who would benefit from your, whatever it is you're starting,
That's
doing.
Right. The products, that's right.
So it just trickles down. Everyone suffers.
Down. That's right. The freer we are, the wealthier we are as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thing. So I often hear my students lamenting. They say it just doesn't seem fair that we're so wealthy and everybody else is poor. And the assumption is that you're born wealthy, that everybody's born wealthy. It's the very opposite. The human condition throughout almost all of human history, 99% of people were super poor throughout almost all of human history until about the last 200 years. And then in around 1820, everything shifted. And there's a phenomenon called the Industrial Revolution that occurred, where machines started working for us. Yeah. Instead of manpower, we had machine power. And machines do about 100 times the work of a human. So instead of humans being slaves and being the workers, we've turned machines, material things, into our workers. Machines are now our slaves. And it made everybody better off, because what happened immediately is productivity increased dramatically. Things that people could never afford, all of a sudden they can afford. So productivity exploded, and everybody's wealth exploded as well. So there's a whole bunch of new products available. There's new lines of work to go into. So it opened up entire new fields of technology and innovation that had never been discovered before. So even my 5-year-old girl, there's things that have been invented in the last 5 years that never existed when we were kids. Mm-hmm. It's just so cool how this is exploding. Everywhere there's freedom, you find more technology, more innovation, and more wealth. And everybody's better off. So we're lifting everybody up from the wealth. And in 1980, I think 44% of the world lived on, it was a subsistence level of living. I think it was like $1.90 a day.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And since then, I think that the last I read, this was, 2010, that number dropped to only about 10%. So what caused this dramatic, you go from before 1820 to about 99% of the world being in extreme poverty, to around 1980, 45% of the world, to 2010, down to 10% of the world. It's capitalism. This freedom to produce things. It's lifting everybody up. The natural state of all of us is poor, naked, all the things that are terrible. That is our natural state. We're prone to die young, all these things. We've just had a radical transformation with this rise of capitalism and freedom.
Yeah, and there you go. The truth, freedom, and health. It all works together.
Yes.
And you're right. When you take God out of the picture, what else do you have but the government to start making those boundaries for everybody? Because we can't have anarchy, because then you get nothing done. I think there are too many things coming in from the outside that stop you. You're always going to have the bullies out there.
Yeah, sure.
They're going to try to stop you from progressing if you're making more, doing better than they are, or they're going to extort. That's human nature. Mm-hmm. So I guess we need a good balance. And I think that's what our culture needs to understand, and democracy and capitalism and seem to go better together than not being able to make our own decisions. And I think that's God made it to be that we have free will to make good decisions. Mm-hmm. There are people who make bad decisions, obviously, but we learn from our mistakes. So the thing that strikes me is how there are a lot of thoughts out there. There are a lot of Christians who really don't understand the difference between the social justice issues with there's a difference between social justice and socialism, and we really need to be careful with that. What can you talk to us about when it comes to the difference between, where do we draw the line as Christians between social justice and socialism? Would it go along the lines with the virtue?
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind in all the discussion is to be a virtuous people, you have to be free. And so anytime the government is coercing you to do something, it undermines the opportunity for virtue. So you being forced to pay a certain percentage of your tax, one, it enslaves you and it says you're owned by the government. Two, it prohibits your opportunity to develop virtue. But part of my exception to the phrase social justice is actually a pretty new term in the history of the world and the history of civilization. And what it does is, what it unfortunately does is it distorts what justice actually is. It's actually antisocial, because what it does is it attacks part of society and says, listen, you owe something to another section of society, and I'm going to take from you to give to another. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is usually the expression that we say. So that's what social justice says. That's opposite of all the traditional definitions of justice. Giving someone what is due them, what is owed them. This is Aristotle, Plato. You give people what they deserve. That's justice. This common justice is the end of society. All our founding fathers said, Madison and several others, you find them saying, what should be the end of government? Justice is the end of civilized society and the proper end of government. They should protect what is just. And it's a common thing. There's no specific man. There's not these specific circumstances that you take into play. There's this universal standards of right and wrong that we apply to everyone. And when you protect this idea of common justice, which applies to everyone across the board, you're protecting their life, their liberty, and their property. Now, if I could take your property from you to give it to another person, you're undermining justice. Well, that's the very thing that social justice says is right, that we ought to do this because these other people deserve it because they're less fortunate or whatever particular aspect they have. So it's antisocial, even though they call it social justice, in that you are coercively expropriating my property to give to another. Now, when you coercively, if you came from next door with a gun and coercively took my property, we call that theft. It doesn't stop being theft if your name is the government. And we just got to keep that in mind. There was this series, I think it was released about 15 years ago, called The Truth Project that Del Tackett did. Yeah. And he would stump his students and he would ask them, is it possible for the government to steal? And a lot of them were like, oh, dang, I don't know. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Wreck-It Ralph. My children love Wreck-It Ralph.
Wreck-It Ralph?
But in this movie, it's called Wreck-It Ralph, and it's this story of this really big guy who breaks down this building, and Fix-It Felix fixes it up after he wrecks it. Well, the whole story, he's going to this thing, Bad Guys Anonymous or whatever, because he feels bad that he's the bad guy. In the whole movie, he's just acting virtuously, but he's just this really big guy that breaks everything. He doesn't mean to break everything, but he thinks, I can't fix anything. I can't do anything good. But the whole movie is about him really not being a bad guy. Even if he's called a bad guy in the game, he's not really a bad guy. And he just tries to sacrifice him. It's just a great movie. But the storyline, if you listen to after the movie, is they actually tell it in a song that he was minding his own business on the day they came. There was a government worker who claimed eminent domain and basically stole his property for the good of the Nicelanders. So they built an apartment complex. They stole his land And every day he was trying to get his land back from the Nicelanders, who were not very nice, but their name was the Nicelanders in
Right.
the movie. And it's like, this is the idea of eminent domain. It's a philosophical view that the government owns everything, including your property and you. It's implied that they own you in some way,
Yeah.
which is very anti-Christian.
It's very anti-Christian. And yeah, you have to follow the line of logic
Yes.
to understand that. And I know we get a lot of kickback for saying that, but I think if people actually understand what is this, Christianity should bring the best out of all of us, and we should be giving. Jesus says, if you have extra, then give it to the poor. And that's one of the things he was always saying. He said, when they were building the church with Paul and the disciples that were at the core, the Jerusalem Council, it's just don't forget the poor.
Yeah.
It was like sexual immorality, blood sacrifices, and don't forget the poor. And Jesus said when he was walking on the earth, he said, the poor you're always going to have with you. So really, it's up to us to feel that virtue and give from our excess and give maybe even out of things that we don't have, still give. Everyone has to be comfortable with, nobody's being forced. With God, you're not forced to do it. You want to do it.
It reminds me of 2 Corinthians 9:7, where Paul's giving instruction to the churches about giving. Each one must give as he has decided in their heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, but God loves a cheerful giver. So you should freely give, but God loves a cheerful giver, but not to be coerced. This voluntary way is the way of virtue in the Christian way. It's not this idea that everyone should just give to the government and then don't worry about it, or the government's going to take from you and then you're good. No, it's a voluntary giving. That's what brings the virtue.
Yeah. Well, that's the big difference. And I really hope that those that are listening that have a difficult time hearing that, just think about it. God does not coerce anybody to do anything ever. We have a choice. And so we are not meant to be coerced into things, no matter what it is. And so that's where Christianity and socialism just are not compatible. I would have to conclude that. And definitely not with communism, because both need to get rid of religion in order to really flourish, because otherwise you're always going to have those pesky religion people thinking that they have a higher authority, and they're not going to go along with it. And just like you said, read those manifestos from these groups, the leaders who have been socialist leaders or communist leaders. That is one of the first things that they say is they have to break up the family and get rid of religion.
Yeah. So. And communism, also known, at least from a philosophical perspective, if you look at communism, it's called as international socialism, whereas national socialism is fascism. And so what people often say, one's a right thing, the other's a left-wing thing. And I think they're both left-wing in that international socialism wants complete government control internationally. That's communism, international socialism. And then just a little to the right of that only wants state control. That's fascism. National socialism is fascism. But that's still toward the government coercion side. But it's only state control of all the industries. So it's not those are both left-wing phenomena. And most people don't realize that. They think, oh, no, fascism, that's over there on the right. And the communism's over on the left. No, they're actually both left-wing as far as left being complete government control.
Yeah. Did you hear just some current news? And I don't know when you out there in the audience are going to be watching this, but yesterday I heard Angela Merkel. No, was it Angela Merkel? No. Oh, goodness. What is the name of our current chairman of the Fed.
Janet Yellen.
Thank you. Yes, Janet Yellen. She said she wants an international tax on the whole world.
Yes.
So it's like, do y'all realize what that implies? You know, if
Yes.
you think this one world movement or is a conspiracy theory, or pay attention. You know, it's like I always I put out there, educate yourself or be enslaved, because you're going to fall into a trap if you don't start educating yourself. Don't trust someone else to tell you what's going on. That it's all okay. Yeah, Janet Yellen. I don't know why I had Angela Merkel on my brain.
Oh, that's okay.
Anyhow, it's been delightful to talk to you. There's so much more to talk about, because I know that you also, we can get into public policy with economics and how that works with Christianity or doesn't work with Christianity. I just feel like we're at a time right now where not enough information is coming out for both sides. It's very one-sided because it's directed. That's called propaganda. I started doing a lot of research on propaganda recently, but have always been interested in marketing and marketing techniques. And that's been used on us for quite some time now. So this has been priming people all my life. I know I've been marketed to, and it's just ramped up, and they've got it perfected now that they know how our brains work. And so I suggest everybody kind of learn some psychology and marketing techniques. Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully, I think you said you would come back one more time at least.
Sure.
And talk with us. Okay, good.
I'd be glad to.
That's awesome, because y'all, this is education that you need to know. It's practical, and it could end up saving your life and your family and your personal bottom line as far as your families are concerned, with how you're going to do life and the jobs that you're going to have, and what you should say and not say, and how you should look at things and pay attention to what the market is doing and what the people who've been put in positions of leadership are saying, because that could determine how your family will be able to live. Okay.
Well, thanks for having me, Catherine.
Oh, it's an absolute, it's just, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks.